The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Mobile Task Force Kappa 7, call sign String Section, arrived at the Venetian estate. Dr. Sarah Chen watched through the armored transport's rain-streaked window as the compound emerged from the mist like a decomposing corpse. The villa's once white walls had yellowed to the color of old bone, and ivy crawled across its facade with the persistence of arterial bleeding. "Command, this is Kappa 7 Actual," spoke Captain Marcus Webb into his headset. "We have visual on the target location. Beginning approach." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Kappa 7. Reminder that all personnel are to avoid direct exposure to any musical notation found on site. Biohazard protocols remain in effect." Dr. Chen adjusted her respirator and checked her equipment bag for the 3rd time. Inside were sample containers, portable analysis tools, and most importantly, a pair of specialized goggles designed to blur visual input just enough to prevent pattern recognition while still allowing navigation. She had read the preliminary reports. She knew what they were walking into. The team consisted of 6 members. Besides Chen and Captain Webb, there was Dr. James Holloway, a musicologist with Foundation clearance who had been specifically requested for this operation. 3 armed operatives, Sergeants Martinez, DuPont, and Kowalski, rounded out the team. They had been briefed on the anomaly's properties, but not its full extent. The Foundation had learned long ago that some knowledge was better parceled out in survivable doses. They exited the transport into the driving rain. The estate's iron gates hung open, one tilted at an unnatural angle like a dislocated shoulder. Beyond stretched a courtyard choked with overgrown gardens that had long since surrendered to entropy. Statues of angels stood among the weeds, their faces worn smooth by decades of weather, leaving only blank expanses where features should have been. "Stay tight," Webb ordered. "Chen, Holloway, center formation. Nobody touches anything until we've established a safe zone." The villa's main entrance was unlocked. The heavy oak door swung inward with a prolonged groan that echoed through the interior, and the sound carried an almost musical quality, as if the house itself were singing a note of welcome or warning. Chen felt her skin prickle beneath her hazmat suit. The entrance hall was vast and empty, its marble floors covered in a thick layer of dust that recorded their passage like fresh snow. A grand staircase curved upward into shadow, and the walls were lined with empty frames where paintings had once hung. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something organic and sweet that reminded Chen uncomfortably of a funeral home. "Site records indicate the study is on the 2nd floor, east wing," Chen said, consulting her tablet. "That's where the initial discovery team found the sheet music before they were evacuated." "Before they started changing," Holloway added quietly. His face was pale behind his respirator. The preliminary medical reports were disturbing, to say the least. Chen had read those reports too. 3 members of the initial reconnaissance team had been exposed to the notation for less than 30 seconds. Within hours, they had begun exhibiting bone growth abnormalities and soft tissue restructuring. They were currently contained in Site-19's medical wing, sedated and stable, but fundamentally altered. Their skeletal structures had begun reorganizing themselves according to acoustic principles that should not exist in human biology. The team ascended the staircase, their footsteps muffled by the dust and their own careful movements. The 2nd floor was a maze of corridors lined with closed doors. Many bore nameplates in Italian, identifying music rooms, practice chambers, and storage areas. The estate had belonged to a composer known only as the Maestro, whose real identity remained unknown despite the Foundation's extensive investigation. He had appeared in Venice in 1847, purchased this villa with gold of unknown origin, and spent the next 40 years in complete isolation, reportedly working on a single musical composition. "Door ahead," Martinez called out. "It's the only one open." The study door stood ajar, light from their helmet lamps spilling through the gap. Captain Webb approached first, weapon raised, then pushed the door fully open with his boot. The study was exactly as described in the initial report, and yet seeing it firsthand sent a chill through Chen's body that had nothing to do with temperature. The room was circular, perhaps 20 meters in diameter, with floor-to-ceiling shelves lining the walls. Every shelf was packed with papers, notebooks, and bound manuscripts. A massive desk dominated the center of the space, and covering every centimeter of its surface were sheets of music. But it was what hung on the walls between the shelves that made Chen's breath catch in her throat. They looked like musical instruments at first glance. Strings stretched between wooden frames, membrane drums mounted on stands, and what appeared to be organ pipes of varying lengths arranged in careful rows. But the materials were wrong. The strings had the glistening, fibrous quality of muscle tissue. The drum membranes were too translucent, revealing networks of capillaries beneath their surface. And the organ pipes, when Chen looked closer with growing horror, had textures that suggested they were not made of wood or metal at all. "Jesus Christ," DuPont whispered. "Are those?" "Don't look directly at the sheet music," Holloway interrupted sharply. "Not without the protective goggles. And for God's sake, don't read it aloud." Chen activated her goggles, and the world blurred into soft focus. She approached the desk carefully, acutely aware that every paper surrounding her might be a potential vector for the anomaly. Through the distortion of her goggles, the musical notation appeared as vague black marks on white paper, unreadable but present. "I need to document this," she said, raising her camera. The device had been modified to capture images without displaying them, automatically uploading to Foundation servers for analysis by personnel in controlled environments. "Holloway, what can you tell me about the composition itself?" The musicologist moved closer, his own protective goggles in place. "Even blurred, I can see the basic structure. This appears to be a symphony, possibly in 7 movements based on the organization of the papers. The notation is conventional in form, standard Western musical notation, but the actual notes..." He paused, leaning closer to one stack of papers. "The patterns are impossible. No human performer could execute these passages. The intervals are too wide, the tempo markings exceed physical capability, and some of these notations don't correspond to any instrument I recognize." "Could they correspond to those?" Martinez gestured toward the organic instruments on the walls. "Possibly," Holloway admitted. "Probably. Which means the maestro was composing for instruments that didn't exist yet. Instruments he intended to create. Or intended to create themselves," Webb said grimly, "from people." A sound echoed through the villa, distant but clear. It was a long, low note that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into their bones. The team froze, weapons rising. "That came from below," Kowalski said. "Basement level, maybe?" Chen checked her site map. The original architectural plans show a lower level, but it's marked as wine cellars and storage. The initial team didn't make it down there before extraction. "Of course they didn't," Webb muttered. He touched his headset. "Command, be advised we're hearing acoustic phenomena from the lower level, requesting guidance." The radio hissed with static for a long moment before the response came. "Copy Kappa 7. Primary objective is documentation and sample retrieval. Secondary objective is locating any additional victims. Proceed with caution." The sound came again, joined this time by others. Higher notes, lower notes, creating a chord that resonated with disturbing beauty. Chen felt it in her chest, in her teeth, in the small bones of her inner ear. It was not merely sound, but something that bypassed normal sensory processing and spoke directly to the nervous system. They found the stairs to the lower level behind a door in the kitchen. The stone steps descended into darkness that their lights could not fully penetrate, as if the shadows down there had mass and substance. The chord continued, rising and falling in slow, breathing rhythms. "Sound is getting louder," DuPont observed, consistent with approach to source. "Thank you for that analysis, Sergeant," Webb said dryly, but Chen heard the tension in his voice. The basement was not what the architectural plans had suggested. Instead of wine cellars, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that must have extended far beyond the villa's original foundation. The space was circular like the study above, but easily 50 meters across, and it was not empty. They stood in rows, 7 deep, arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform. The choir. That was the only word Chen's mind could supply, though it failed to capture the full horror of what she was seeing. They had been people once. That much was still evident in the basic structure, in the presence of heads and torsos and limbs. But the maestro had remade them according to his vision, transforming human biology into instruments of his unfinished symphony. The nearest figure had a rib cage that had expanded and opened like a flower, the bones spreading wide to create a resonance chamber lined with pink tissue that pulsed with each breath. Its mouth hung permanently open, jaw dislocated and extended, and from its throat emerged multiple tubes of flesh that rose and curved like the pipes of an organ. As Chen watched in frozen horror, air moved through those pipes, producing the low note they had been hearing. The figure beside it was different. Its spine had erupted through the skin of its back, vertebrae separating and extending into a series of bony protrusions that vibrated with visible frequency. The skin between them had stretched into membranes, creating something that resembled both a xylophone and a stringed instrument. Fingers that had grown to 3 times their normal length plucked at their own nerve endings, which now hung external to the body like harp strings. Row after row, each figure had been transformed into something unique, something that served a specific purpose in the symphony's instrumentation. Some had drums where their abdomens should have been, skin stretched over cavities that should have held organs. Others had become living woodwinds, their tracheas and bronchial tubes modified and extended into complex networks of air passages. "Oh God," Holloway breathed. "They're still alive. Look at their eyes." He was right. The eyes moved, tracking the team's progress into the chamber. Some held madness, others held a terrible lucid awareness, and in a few, Chen saw something that might have been pleading or might have been warning. "How many?" Webb asked quietly. Chen did a quick count. 47 visible, possibly more in the shadows. "Command, this is Kappa 7, Webb spoke into his radio. "We've found the victims, requesting immediate medical evac and I don't know what else. They've been extensively modified. I'm not sure they can be moved safely." The radio crackled. "Describe modifications." "Biological restructuring, consistent with musical instrument construction. They're alive but non-responsive. Appears to be a choir configuration." "Understood. Continue documentation. Medical team is being assembled." A new sound joined the chord, higher and sharper. It came from a figure in the front row whose vocal cords had lengthened and multiplied, hanging from its open mouth like the strings of a violin. The sound cut through Chen like a physical thing, and she felt an answering vibration in her own throat. "Did you feel that?" Martinez asked, his hand going to his neck. "Everyone out," Webb ordered immediately. "Back to the stairs now." But before they could move, light flooded the chamber. Not from their helmet lamps, but from sources built into the walls themselves, revealing the full scope of the space, and more terrifyingly, the figure on the raised platform. The conductor. It had been the maestro once. Chen was certain of that, though precious little humanity remained. The figure was fused to the podium, its lower body merged with wood and metal in a seamless union of flesh and material. Its arms had elongated grotesquely, bones visible through translucent skin, ending in hands that held a baton of carved bone. Its head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible, and its face was a mask of ecstatic concentration. And it was moving. The baton rose slowly, deliberately. The chord from the choir swelled in response, growing louder and more complex as additional voices joined the harmony. Chen felt her bones beginning to resonate, a sensation that started as a mild vibration but was rapidly intensifying. "Run!" Webb shouted. They turned for the stairs, but the sound followed them, wrapped around them, penetrated them. Chen's ribcage ached. She pressed a hand to her chest and felt movement beneath her palm, felt her bones shifting in response to the acoustic pressure. Martinez went down first. He stumbled, clutching at his legs, and when Chen looked back, she saw his femurs lengthening visibly through his hazmat suit, the fabric tearing as his skeletal structure reorganized itself. He screamed, and the scream came out as a perfect C-sharp that harmonized with the choir. "Keep moving." Webb grabbed Chen's arm and pulled her forward. Behind them, DuPont had stopped, staring at his hands as his fingers began to extend. The metacarpals were splitting, multiplying, creating additional digits that would serve as more efficient strikers for the instrument he was becoming. They reached the stairs, but Kowalski collapsed on the 3rd step. "My spine," he gasped. "I can feel it. It's separating. Oh God, it's separating." Holloway was whimpering, a high-pitched sound that was becoming more tonal, more musical. "The notation," he said. "I saw too much. I tried not to read it, but some of it got through. It's in my head now. I can hear it. I can hear what I'm supposed to become. Chen's jaw ached. She touched her face and felt the bones of her skull beginning to shift, felt her teeth loosening in their sockets as her mouth prepared to expand into a resonance chamber. The pain was extraordinary, a fire that burned through her entire skeletal system. Webb was the only one still moving normally. He grabbed Chen under the arms and dragged her up the stairs, even as she felt her ribcage beginning to spread. "Stay with me, doctor. That's an order. Stay with me." They burst into the kitchen, and Webb slammed the basement door shut. Through the thick wood, the choir's song continued, muffled but still present. Chen could feel it in her bones, could feel the changes accelerating. Her spine was lengthening, vertebrae separating with audible pops that should have paralyzed her but somehow didn't. "Command, this is Webb. We are experiencing Class 4 anomalous exposure. Multiple team members transforming. I need containment protocols now. I need..." His voice caught, and Chen saw him touch his throat. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, had become more resonant, more pure. "I need help." The radio was silent. Chen tried to speak, but produced only a musical tone. Her vocal cords had already changed, had already accepted their new purpose. She could feel them vibrating in harmony with the choir below, could feel herself being pulled into the symphony's structure. Webb's eyes met hers, and she saw her own terror reflected there. His jaw was beginning to distend. The bones of his face were reorganizing themselves according to acoustic principles, creating cavities and chambers that would amplify sound with perfect efficiency. The door to the basement bulged outward, not from physical pressure but from sound itself, from the accumulated acoustic force of 47 transformed humans singing in perfect unison. The wood creaked, the hinges groaned, and then the door opened. The conductor stood in the doorway, impossibly there, impossibly mobile despite the podium fused to its lower body. It moved with a gliding motion, as if the floor itself was carrying it forward. The baton remained raised, and its face held an expression of sublime anticipation. Chen understood then. The symphony was not complete. It had never been complete. The maestro had spent 40 years composing a piece that required specific instruments that did not exist in nature, instruments that had to be created from human biology itself. He had begun with himself, had transformed his own body into the conductor. Then he had lured others, one by one, and added them to his choir. But it was still not enough. The symphony required more voices, more instruments, more variations in the acoustic possibilities of transformed flesh. It required them. The baton descended, and Chen's body responded without volition. Her mouth opened wide, wider than should have been possible, and a sound emerged from depths she had not known she possessed. It was not a scream. It was a note, pure and clear and perfectly in tune with the choir below. Webb sang beside her, his voice a deeper counterpoint to her own. Through the doorway, she could see the others climbing the stairs, Martinez dragging his elongated legs, Dupont's multiplied fingers playing rhythms against his own restructured ribs, Kowalski's separated vertebrae creating a percussion that drove the tempo forward. Holloway appeared last, his transformation the most complete. His entire body had become an instrument, a biological synthesis of string and wind and percussion that produced sounds Chen had never imagined possible. And his eyes, alone among all of them, held no fear, only understanding, only acceptance. The conductor's baton moved in complex patterns, and the choir responded. Chen felt herself harmonizing, felt her transformed body producing exactly the sounds required by the score that had been written so long ago. The pain had not stopped, but it had become irrelevant, subsumed into the larger purpose of the music. They moved as one, drawn back down the stairs into the chamber. The original choir welcomed them with swelling harmonies, making space in the arrangement for these new voices. Chen took her place in the third row, between a figure whose lungs had become a bellows and another whose entire torso was now a resonating chamber lined with vocal cords. The conductor returned to its podium, and the baton rose again. This time, when it descended, the entire choir responded with a force that shook the foundation of the villa. They sang the first movement, a piece that explored the lower registers of transformed human anatomy. They sang the second movement, which climbed into frequencies that shattered the windows high above them. They sang the third, fourth, and fifth movements, each one more complex than the last, each one requiring sounds that no normal human could produce. And then they reached the sixth movement, and Chen understood why the maestro had never completed his symphony. This movement required something beyond mere transformation. It required consciousness, required awareness, required the singers to understand what they had become and to embrace it fully. It required them to want to sing. Chen felt the choice before her like a physical thing. She could resist, could cling to the remnants of her humanity, could refuse to participate in this final horror. But she could also feel the music itself, could sense the mathematical beauty of the composition, could understand the vision that had driven the maestro to such terrible extremes. The symphony was perfect. It was abhorrent and magnificent and utterly perfect. And it was incomplete. Webb sang first, his transformed voice rising in the opening phrase of the sixth movement. It was a sound of acceptance, of surrender, of choosing to become part of something larger than himself. One by one, the others joined him. Martinez, DuPont, Kowalski, Holloway, whose voice soared above them all in a descant that spoke of understanding transcending horror. Chen opened her mouth. The note that emerged was hers and not hers, was human and beyond human. It hurt, it was beautiful. It was both and neither and everything in between. The sixth movement built to a crescendo that seemed to bend reality itself. The walls of the chamber vibrated in sympathy. The air became visible as sound made manifest. And at the peak, at the moment of absolute acoustic intensity, Chen felt something shift. The seventh movement began. She had not thought the maestro had written a seventh movement. The initial reports had mentioned only 6. But as the choir sang, as their transformed bodies produced harmonies that should not exist, Chen realized the truth. The seventh movement had not been written because it could not be written. It could only be discovered, could only emerge from the intersection of composition and consciousness, of music and biology, of human choice and inhuman transformation. The seventh movement was improvisation. It was every member of the choir contributing their own voice, their own variation, their own understanding of what the symphony meant. It was chaos and order existing simultaneously. It was the sound of boundaries dissolving. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was the end of everything they had been and the beginning of something they could not name. The conductor's baton moved faster, guiding but not controlling, shaping but not constraining. Its face held an expression Chen had never seen on any human countenance, a joy so profound it transcended sanity. And then, with a final sustained chord that seemed to encompass all possible frequencies, the symphony ended. Silence fell over the chamber like a physical weight. Chen stood in her place, her transformed body still resonating with the final note, and became aware of herself again as a discrete entity rather than part of a collective instrument. The conductor lowered its baton slowly. For a long moment, it simply stood there, and Chen wondered if this was death, if the completion of the symphony meant the end of everything. But then the conductor's head turned and its eyes met hers, and she saw recognition there, gratitude, and something that might have been peace. The figure began to change, not transforming further, but reversing, unwinding, the flesh separating from the podium, the bones shortening, the face reassembling itself into something closer to human. The conductor was becoming the maestro again, was returning to the form he had abandoned so long ago. But the process was not gentle. Chen watched as the biological fusion that had sustained him for decades came undone, watched as the price of his artistic vision finally came due. The maestro collapsed, his body no longer able to support itself without the structural modifications he had imposed upon it. Around the chamber, the choir began to change as well, not reversing like the maestro, but stabilizing, their bodies accepting their new forms and adapting to them. Chen felt her own transformation settling, felt her bones locking into their new configuration, felt her vocal cords accepting their permanent alteration. They would never be human again, but they would live. Footsteps on the stairs announced new arrivals. Foundation medical personnel in full biohazard gear, accompanied by armed guards and researchers with equipment Chen recognized as acoustic dampeners. They had waited for the symphony to end. They had known somehow that interruption would be more dangerous than observation. "Dr. Chen?" One of the medical personnel approached cautiously. "Can you understand me?" Chen tried to speak and produced a melodious tone instead of words. She tried again, focusing on modulating her transformed vocal anatomy to approximate human speech. "Yes," she managed, though the word came out as a musical phrase. "I understand. We're going to get you out of here. All of you. We have containment facilities prepared, medical support standing by." Chen looked around the chamber at her fellow choir members, at Webb and the others who had entered as her teammates and emerged as something else. They would be contained. They would be studied. They would spend the rest of their lives as SCP objects themselves, living anomalies to be documented and analyzed. But they had completed the symphony. Against all reason, against all horror, they had participated in something that had never existed before and could never exist again. They had been instruments in a composition that transcended the boundaries of human music. The medical team began the careful process of extraction. Chen allowed herself to be guided toward the stairs, her transformed body moving with a grace that was both alien and natural. As she climbed, she looked back once at the chamber, at the space that had been both torture chamber and concert hall. The maestro's body lay still on the podium, finally at rest, and on his face, visible even from a distance, was a smile of absolute completion. The rain had stopped when they emerged from the villa. Dawn was breaking over Venice, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Chen stood in the courtyard, surrounded by Foundation personnel, and felt the morning air on her transformed face. Somewhere in the villa behind her, teams were already at work documenting the study, carefully collecting the sheet music that had started everything. The notation would be contained, stored in facilities designed to prevent any further exposure. The symphony would never be performed again. But Chen carried it within her now, written into her bones and her flesh and her voice. They all did. The choir would never truly be disbanded because they were the symphony, were its living embodiment. A medical transport waited to take them to Site 19. Chen climbed aboard with the others, settling into a seat designed for bodies that no longer quite fit human proportions. Through the window, she watched the villa recede into the distance, watched it become just another shadow in the Venetian morning. And in the silence of the transport, surrounded by others who had shared her transformation, Chen hummed. It was the opening phrase of the seventh movement, the improvised section that had been their own contribution to the maestro's vision. One by one, the others joined her, their transformed voices blending in harmony. The guards watched nervously, hands on their weapons. The medical personnel exchanged worried glances, but no one tried to stop them. Perhaps they understood that the music was no longer a danger but a necessity, a way for the transformed to communicate what words could no longer express. The transport drove through the streets of Venice as dawn broke fully, carrying its cargo of living instruments back to containment. And the song continued, soft but persistent, a reminder that some symphonies once begun could never truly end. They were no longer fully human, but they were alive. They were conscious. They were aware, and they could sing.